Welcome to Crash Course History. I'm Kalina Medeiros, and today we'll be discussing the Iran-Iraq War. The strenuous relationship between Iran and Iraq created an immense amount of death and destruction because of new chemical weapons, prolonged fighting, ongoing disagreements between contrasting religious and cultural beliefs within each society. The war started on September 22nd, 1980 and lasted for almost 8 years. It ended on August 20th, 1988, and no one was able to claim victory. As the UN helped force a ceasefire, the war dragged on for a long time, and fighting occurred in both countries. Losses on both sides were immense, and tactically both sides were weak. Their ways of fighting did not help the death toll lower in any way. Numerous continuing problems with both societies added to the tension that led to the war. The wanting of land, different in religious and cultural ideals, and their own countries, as well as the constant want for more economic power, were all reasons as to why the war started in the first place and continued for so long with no real outcome. So, the real question is,
what actually caused this war?
The Iranian Revolution, in many cases, was the trigger for the Iran-Iraq War. It started in around 1953 when the Iranian government was overthrown with the help of the United States. The Shah was put back in power, and within the next 20 years, there were rapid economic growth and high inflation due to rapid spending. In 1970s, a purchase of a home or even a car was beyond the means of a middle-class family. The Shah's regime was very violent and had over 4,000 secret agents that made up a secret police force called the Savak. These agents were regularly hunting down people who opposed the Shah. By 1978, Shia religious leaders had organized protests against the Sunni-controlled government, and as time went on, these protests became more and more violent. By 1979, the Shah had fled the country, and Khomeini, the leader of the revolution, had taken over. Throughout this transition, President Saddam Hussein of Iraq had thought of Iran to be weak. At this time in history, oil was becoming more and more important to produce. Iraq wanted to seize a part of Iran that was very rich in oil on the border of Kazakhstan. Along with this, Iraq wanted to claim the banks of the Shah al-Arab River that is formed by the connection of the Tigris and Euphrates River. The Tigris and Euphrates River is very historically important because of the constant border disputes that have occurred there. Now it's time for the thought bubble. Several centuries ago, Islam experienced a split. There became two different sects of the religion, the Shias and the Sunnis. The split was caused by the disputes over who would become the caliph. This is basically the Pope of Islam. The Sunnis elected the most qualified man as the caliph. However, the Shias insisted the role could only be taken by a direct descendant of Muhammad. Over the times, the Sunnis took over most governments and the Shias had little success doing so. Shias, however, were able to become the official religion of Iran in the 16th century. Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq at this time, was one of the main reasons as to why Iran and Iraq got into this war. His idea of attacking the country that was preoccupied by a revolution at the time seemed easy to him. He didn't take into consideration that he was about to invade a large country with relatively strong military forces. If Iran had any clue that they were about to be invaded, they would have protected their border with their military forces. The Iran-Iraq War resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. At the end, over 1 million people had died. A large amount of money had gone into the costs of destruction. A little later in the war, Iraq had used the chemical weapons mostly on their borders to keep people from coming in. Once Iraq discovered how powerful these weapons were, they began to use them extensively. This caused huge amounts of damage and scary amounts of casualties. Although Iran didn't have chemical weapons, they still had a significant amount of them, and a lot of bombs, and these played a significant role in the amount of casualties that occurred. Iran, along with other countries that weren't in the war, didn't know how to handle being attacked by chemical weapons, as it was a new way of fighting and the hardest to defend. War affected all people who were fighting on the front, but also the people that were near the war. Lingering effects of chemical weapons created an immense amount of illness for civilians. As both countries started bombing oil production facilities, large oil spills occurred in the water, which led to diseased water. Since water is such an important aspect in a person's life, the only thing that followed diseased water was sickness. Because of this, death tolls were rising, both due to sickness and diseased water. The war was not only important for the people of Iran and Iraq, but also for the people of the rest of the world. As many of you know, the Middle East was just shaken by the war, and many repercussions still exist today. Alliances shifted and changed throughout the world during this time. The United Nations was greatly involved in helping the end of the war. The United States was a large piece in the beginning of the Iranian Revolution due to the coup that was brought on to help bring the Shah back in power. Other countries that felt they were in immense need for oil were also played major roles in the war. Russia specifically felt that they needed large amounts of oil, so they sided with whomever they could get the most amount of oil from. All of these things affected the outcome of the alliances, relationships between other countries all around the world. The war was now dragging on. Between 1982 and 1986, death tolls rose by over 500,000 for the Iranians and 100,000 to 200,000 for the Iraqis. These numbers were due to the previously talked about chemical weapons and new ways of fighting. These caused more death and destruction through not only people fighting, but also civilians around where the fighting was occurring. Both sides' tactics were very poor. The ways each military went into battle only led to people getting hurt in the end. The poor tactics were a constant problem throughout the entire war, and at this point, the war needed to come to an end. The year is now 1988. The war has been going on for almost 8 years, and the death tolls just keep rising. The fighting is going back and forth, and surrounding countries are trying to help fix the issues between the Iraqis and Iranians. The United Nations Iran-Iraq Military Observer Group was in charge of trying to resolve the issues at this time. The group was established during the war and withdrew as the war ended. July of 1988 was the ultimate change in the war, specifically the United Nations Security Resolution 598, Islamic Republic of Iran, that was written at this time. This was the end of the war, a stalemate, no one able to claim victory. A war fought for 8 long years ended with both countries with immense losses. Now it's time for the open letter. Let's see what Carl has to say.
Kalina, how was the United Nations Security Resolution 598 Islamic Republic of Iran, and how did that affect the Iran and Iraq war during this time?
Awesome question, Carl. The war was dragging on for so long, many people wanted some solution for the war, anything that could stop the destruction. At this point in the war, the United Nations was trying to find a way to get both sides to agree to help fix the issues at hand. The United Nations Security Resolution 598 Islamic Republic of Iran was a document that asked for immediate ceasefire and implemented the discontinue of all military actions and withdrawing forces between both countries, causing an end to the war. As the war was now over, the question of change was prominent. Did the war do anything or just make it worse? These questions were running through people's minds. The war ended with neither side being able to claim victory. Since neither had claimed victory, the idea of a feudal war is important. A feudal war is a war in which is incapable of providing any useful result. For the Iraqis, the number of losses was high. This left many children without parents, wives without husbands, and it left young men scarred from their experiences. Along with this, the heavy amounts of national debt for the Iraqis had huge tolls on the oil industry within the country. Many Iraqis today view the end of the war as a starting point for the country's economic and social decline. After the war, the Middle East was less stable. Countries picked side and made allies for the future. A new geopolitical map of alliances was created. As the repercussions of the war and its following events are still being felt today, the importance of the Iran-Iraq war will be forever embedded into history. A generation of men feel the struggle every day and will live with it for the rest of their lives. This extremely strenuous relationship between Iran and Iraq created an immense amount of death and destruction through these nations. Chemical weapons prolonged the fighting, and the created ongoing disagreements that were based upon different religious and cultural beliefs. Thank you for following along. As always, I hope you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, give it a big thumbs up. For more information on the Iran-Iraq war, check out these sites down below.